My name's Amber Wilson, I'm 32 years old, and I've spent over a decade building a stable life as a financial analyst based in Boston. I've worked hard, lived modestly, and managed to create a sense of security that didn't come easy. So when a thick envelope landed in my mailbox one chilly morning, filled with mortgage paperwork for a property I'd never seen, I was baffled. Before I could even process what was happening, the phone rang. It was my mother. Without preamble, she said, "Your sister needs support, and we've decided the house is your responsibility now." No discussion. No warning. Just a statement. Wrapped in entitlement. I was floored. And when I refused, the situation escalated in a way I could have never imagined. They actually filed a lawsuit against me, demanding nearly $500,000. What unfolded after that shattered every assumption I'd ever had about what family meant. Our entire relationship unraveled and landed us in front of a judge. But before I dive into how this financial ambush tore through the Wilson household, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button. If you've ever faced emotional blackmail disguised as family support, you might learn something that saves you from making the same mistake I did. To understand how things spiraled so violently out of control, you need some background on the dynamics in our household growing up. I was raised in a Connecticut suburb by Eleanor and Richard Wilson, alongside my younger sibling Heather, who's 4 years behind me. From the outside, we looked like your average middle-income family. But inside, there was always a sense of imbalance. I was the planner, the achiever, the one expected to lead by example. Heather? She was pampered, defended, and handed privileges I never saw. Whenever I scored top marks, the response was lukewarm, could have done better. But if Heather scraped by with a barely passing grade, she was taken out for ice cream. On birthdays, I received practical gifts, secondhand items, necessities. Meanwhile, Heather unwrapped brand new electronics or expensive jewelry. The difference wasn't loud, it was consistent. That consistency bred resentment I buried for years. In high school, I juggled multiple part-time jobs just to afford basic needs, while Heather focused on socializing, hobbies, and maintaining her Instagram-perfect life. My parents claimed they were letting her enjoy her youth. I was told to prepare for the real world. Despite all that, I pushed forward. I secured a partial scholarship to Boston University, supplemented it with federal loans, and worked in the library 20 hours a week just to stay afloat. My parents contributed nothing, saying their priority was saving for Heather's future. I didn't complain, I took pride in earning every inch of my progress. Heather, meanwhile, hopped from one college to another, 3 institutions in 5 years, no degree in sight. Each time, tuition was paid in full, her rent covered, and credit card bills forgiven. The total investment in her education, over $150,000. My student debt? Mine alone. Post-graduation, I climbed the corporate ladder from the bottom. I lived in a cramped apartment with 3 roommates, skipped dinners out, reused outfits, and chipped away at debt dollar by dollar. After 5 grueling years, I managed to move into my own place, a modest 1-bedroom near downtown. I built an emergency fund, paid off my loans by 30, and finally felt like I had breathing room. Heather? She floated from one entry-level job to another, never lasting more than a few months. At 27, she still lived rent-free in our parents' basement. When she finally moved out, they co-signed her lease, paid her deposit, and even bought furniture for her apartment. And that's when the pattern began repeating in adulthood. Every time Heather had a financial hiccup, a car repair, a broken phone, overdue bills, I got the call. "Amber, can you help? You're good with numbers. You must have some savings." They made it sound like logic, not obligation. When Heather wanted to go on a beach vacation with her friends, my dad suggested I cover the cost as an early birthday gift, never mind that her birthday was still 4 months away. Every favor came wrapped in emotional manipulation. And every time, I told myself it would be the last, but it never was. Every request came with the same assumption: you're doing fine, so fix her problems. The gatherings became unbearable. Whenever I shared a career win, a promotion, a new investment, my success was downplayed or immediately contrasted with Heather's troubles. "She's behind on her rent," my mom would sigh. "Her credit score is tanking." The subtext? Do something about it. One particular Thanksgiving burned into my memory. I had just earned the title of senior financial analyst, an accomplishment that came with a healthy salary bump. My aunt congratulated me. My dad pulled me aside, eyes hopeful. "Would you consider paying off Heather's loan? Just to help her reset?" I hesitated. "I'll have to look at my expenses." But as we left, I caught my mother whispering to Heather, "Don't worry, Amber always comes through." And in that moment, something inside me began to crack. "She doesn't grasp how ordinary folks survive," my mother muttered once, with astonishing conviction. The irony was laughable, this woman had shielded my sister from every adult responsibility imaginable. And yet, somewhere inside me, I still sought their approval. I longed for that moment when they'd finally acknowledge my efforts. I wanted them to recognize that I'd built something stable, on my own, without shortcuts or their involvement. Maybe a part of me was still that overlooked child, hoping achievements would eventually earn me the same affection and support Heather received. Effortlessly. That fragile hope was about to be obliterated in a way I couldn't have imagined, even in my worst dreams. It started on a nondescript Tuesday in early April. I came home after a typical workday and began sifting through the usual stack of envelopes, utility bills, catalogs, random junk. One large envelope from Massachusetts Bay Mortgage Company stood out. I assumed it was an advertisement and almost tossed it. Something stopped me. I opened it. What I found made my knees buckle. Inside was a complete mortgage application package. The address? 247 Oakwood Drive, an upscale neighborhood just outside Boston. Loan amount, $480,000. Monthly payment, $2,850. 30-year fixed rate, and the borrower, me. My name, my supposed signature, my financial profile. I stared at the paperwork, heart racing. I hadn't applied for this. I didn't even know this house existed. I frantically called the lender, but it was after office hours. I left a desperate voicemail, reporting what I assumed was identity theft, and then spent a sleepless night spiraling through possibilities: hacking, fraud, stolen documents. But nothing prepared me for what came next. At sunrise, just as I was composing an email to the mortgage company, my mother called. "So, did you receive the documents?" she asked breezily, like she was checking if her birthday card arrived. "What is this?" I snapped. "Why am I being listed as a borrower? For a house I've never seen?" "That's exactly why we should talk," she replied. "Your dad and I want to have dinner tonight. Heather will be there. Let's discuss it in person." My stomach twisted. "No, Mom. You need to explain now. Did someone steal my information?" She sighed, irritated. "Stop being theatrical, Amber. It's just a family decision. Come at 6. Before I could protest, she ended the call, shaken. I called out of work, something I never did, and spent the day in a haze of confusion and dread. That evening, I drove to their house in Connecticut, the home I grew up in. Heather's Civic, the one my parents co-signed and gifted her when she moved out, was already parked in the driveway. As I stepped inside, I felt the tension hit immediately. They were already seated. My father looked like he was about to conduct a performance review, while my mother handed me a glass of wine without asking if I wanted one. My dad motioned to the armchair across from them. "Amber." He began with a practiced calm, "We understand this mortgage came as a surprise, but we've been preparing for this for some time." "Preparing what, exactly?" I asked, not touching the drink. My mother jumped in. "You know Heather's been overpaying for that place in Cambridge. It doesn't make sense for her to keep renting when she could have something permanent." I blinked. "And that has what to do with me?" My dad cleared his throat. "We found a wonderful home, ideal for starting a family someday. But given Heather's current employment history and credit record, she wouldn't qualify alone." A chill ran down my spine. "You used my profile, my income, my credit, without asking?" My voice was rising. My mother's tone turned patronizing. "Don't get upset. We thought it through carefully." My father looked firm. "We believe it's best that you handle the payments. It's time you help support your sibling." My jaw dropped. "You made this decision without consulting me? Without permission? You're in a solid place financially," my mother reasoned, as if that justified everything. "Heather needs a home. Families support each other." Heather finally chimed in. "You're always bragging about your stocks and bonuses. You can handle this. I'm barely scraping by. Because you've never stayed employed long enough to build stability." I shouted. "And even if I could manage it, which I can't without jeopardizing my own plans, you have no right to involve me in any of this." My mother's face hardened. "Let's not throw around ugly terms." "Ugly? You forged my signature. That's criminal." "How?" I demanded. "How did you even get my records?" My dad shifted in his seat. "We kept your tax returns from when you lived here. And your mother, well, she's always had neat handwriting." I went cold. "You faked my signature? You committed fraud. You took my financial identity and used it to trap me in a $480,000 loan." Heather rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic. It's not like we're random strangers." "No," I said, my voice shaking, "you're worse. You're the people I trusted most. And you didn't just betray me, you stole my future." My voice rose uncontrollably, disbelief fueling every word. "You forged legal papers and expect me to quietly foot the bill?" "Keep your voice down," my father snapped. "This is happening. The purchase is finalized." Heather gets the keys next week. No, I said firmly, standing. I never agreed to this arrangement. I won't be responsible for a loan I never authorized. What are you implying? My mother asked, her tone sharp and cold. I'm saying this clearly, absolutely not. I won't pay a dime toward that loan. And tomorrow, I'm contacting law enforcement and the mortgage provider. What you've done is illegal. For a moment, the room fell into stunned silence. Before chaos erupted, Heather burst into loud sobs, collapsing onto the sofa like I'd personally destroyed her dreams. My mother launched into a dramatic monologue about all the sacrifices she claimed they'd made for me, most of which were pure fiction. My father's face turned red as he yelled that I was being selfish and heartless. Again, you never think about family, he barked. This is the first time we've asked you to do something meaningful. I scoffed. Meaningful? You mean criminal. The right thing would have been teaching Heather how to budget instead of bailing her out every time she failed. Respecting me enough to ask before committing fraud would have been decent, too. I grabbed my handbag and headed for the exit. My mother followed, grabbing my arm with an iron grip. If you leave now, she hissed, don't bother coming back. I met her gaze without flinching. If being part of this family requires letting you destroy my future and violate the law, then maybe I never belonged in it at all. That drive home was one of the longest of my life. My cheeks were soaked. I wasn't just furious, I was grieving. The people I had spent decades trying to please had revealed exactly how little I mattered beyond my bank account. I wasn't a daughter. In their eyes, I was a convenient source of cash with no right to boundaries. The next morning, I called Jessica, a longtime friend who works as a paralegal for a firm specializing in financial abuse and fraud. My voice trembled as I laid everything out. Amber, this isn't just morally wrong, it's legally dangerous, she said. They stole your identity. That's mortgage fraud. It could land you in serious trouble if you don't act quickly. I know, I whispered. But they're my parents. If this goes public, Heather will unravel. Jessica was sympathetic, but firm. You don't have to press charges. But you do have to protect yourself. That house loan is tied to your credit. If a single payment's missed, the consequences land on you. She put me in touch with Rachel Goldstein, one of the attorneys at her firm. Rachel kindly agreed to meet me without charge for an initial consult. She was blunt from the beginning. First, we gather everything. Documents, messages, anything. Showing they admitted to this. Then, we notify the lender, the records office, and possibly law enforcement that your identity was used without permission. Could they be arrested? I asked, torn between anger and sorrow. That depends on whether you press charges. But regardless, you need to legally disassociate yourself before any payments trigger long-term damage. Over the following week, I compiled every piece of evidence I could, copies of the forged forms, texts from my parents acknowledging their actions, and a detailed timeline. Rachel helped me draft an official letter to them, delivered by certified mail, stating that I was not responsible, that their actions constituted fraud, and that I would take every legal step necessary. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. It was my dad's number. I didn't answer. Instead, I listened to the voicemail as his voice thundered through the speaker. Enough with this immature nonsense. Your mother's a wreck. Heather hasn't stopped crying. Stop being dramatic. Pick up the phone and fix this like a grown-up. I didn't call back. Following Rachel's direction, I submitted formal statements to both the mortgage lender and the local property records office, including an affidavit swearing my signature was forged. That's when things escalated to a level I never anticipated. The barrage began, calls from unknown numbers every hour. I blocked them all. My mother showed up at my office, sobbing in the lobby until building security escorted her out. Then my father emailed my employer, alleging I was mentally unstable and lashing out irrationally at relatives. Fortunately, my boss was supportive and saw right through their antics. Heather, meanwhile, went full melodrama online. She posted teary videos about how her cruel, selfish sister was trying to make her homeless. She shared screenshots of conversations, heavily edited, of course, to make it seem like I was heartless. She even launched a GoFundMe titled, "Left with Nothing, My Sister Abandoned Me." It raised several $1,000s before I could even begin responding. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in a decade suddenly found their voices. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely remembered flooded me with accusatory messages about loyalty and gratitude. Some didn't even bother, just blocked me outright. The only person who reached out with sincerity, my grandmother Ruth, and thank God for her. Amber, sweetheart, I won't claim to know all the details. My grandmother's voicemail began gently, but I'm here, whenever you're ready to talk. I love you. That single, unconditional gesture shattered my composure. It was the only voice from my family that didn't come entangled with coercion, threats, or guilt. Just warmth. Just care. Just her. Meanwhile, the fraud department at The mortgage company acknowledged my claim, but the investigator warned that resolution could take several months. They wouldn't disclose the potential consequences for my parents, citing confidentiality during active review. The lack of clarity. Gnawed at me. I started waking up from panic-filled dreams where I was handcuffed or evicted, unable to breathe. Anxiety seeped into every corner of my routine. Work performance slipped. My manager, usually brisk and businesslike, pulled me aside after a presentation where I'd completely blanked on my data. "Is everything all right, Amber?" she asked. "Softly, Elite. Just tired." Sleep-deprived and emotionally spent, I stopped attending yoga. I ghosted dinner invites. Friends' texts sat unread for days. I'd come home, stare at my inbox, and refresh it repeatedly, desperate for some message from Rachel, the only person I trusted at that point. Then, my phone buzzed. A new voicemail from my father. I tapped play. "Amber. Enough." His tone was cold and deliberate. "Your mother and I have retained counsel. If you don't retract your allegations and assume financial responsibility for Heather's home by Friday, we will file a civil suit for the full value of the property. You're not as clever as you think, Boston. We've documented verbal commitments. And years of family agreements. Don't test us." My stomach flipped. I forwarded the recording to Rachel immediately. She rang me within seconds. "They're bluffing," she said flatly. "There is no enforceable, verbal contract forcing someone to assume another adult's mortgage. And no judge accepts family duty as a binding agreement. So, I can ignore it?" "Not quite," Rachel explained. "If they file, even if it's completely meritless, you'll still need to defend yourself. The legal system doesn't automatically punish baseless claims. Litigation is draining. We should be ready." My voice trembled. "What now?" "Keep documenting everything. Do not engage. And Amber." She hesitated before continuing, "You should consider seeking a restraining order. The harassment has escalated beyond what's acceptable." "A protective order against my parents?" The idea was so alien, I laughed, until I didn't. Until I remembered the way my mother had clutched my arm. The number of missed calls. The public scene in my office lobby. The lie-filled email my father had sent my employer. Laughter turned to nausea. 4 days later, my doorbell rang. A man in a gray windbreaker handed me a large envelope. "You've been served." I stood frozen in my doorway, lawsuit documents in hand. My own family was suing me for $480,000. Their legal filing painted a twisted narrative that I had promised to buy Heather a home, reneged at the last second, and left them scrambling to cover the cost. The words verbal contract, unjust enrichment, and, most absurdly, familial fraud were peppered throughout. That evening, surrounded by affidavits and notepads and half-drunk tea gone cold, I sat crumpled on my sofa. The apartment I'd worked so hard to afford felt less like a refuge and more like a fragile illusion. I started doubting myself. Would it be easier to just pay the mortgage? Could I make the payments and restore some version of peace? Was this fight worth the toll it was taking? But then the fog lifted. This wasn't about money. It had never been just about the loan or the interest or the title on some house I'd never set foot in. This was about years of being the responsible one while Heather floundered, failed, and was endlessly rescued. This was about finally saying, no more. No more financial exploitation dressed as family duty. No more guilt masquerading as loyalty. I dialed Rachel. "They filed," I whispered. "And I want to fight it, with everything I have." Her voice didn't waver. "Then we fight." The complaint was officially titled Wilson et al. V. Wilson, a grim joke stamped in ink. 37 pages of revisionist history. According to my parents, I had verbally promised to purchase Heather's home. They'd simply facilitated the transaction on my behalf. They claimed I'd benefited from the arrangement through increased family unity and shared property value. None of it had a shred of legal standing, but the clock was ticking. I had 21 days to respond or risk default judgment. Rachel was willing to help with the initial reply but strongly advised I retain a litigator. The problem? Litigation attorneys come with steep price tags. Even with a solid salary, my savings weren't built for this kind of sustained legal warfare. Still, I couldn't afford to lose. After consulting with 3 firms, I retained Marcus Bennett, a seasoned litigator with a reputation for dismantling familial financial abuse cases. His confidence was calm, calculated. "This is exactly the type of case I've built my practice on," he said during our first meeting. "Let's dismantle their house of cards." And with that, the real battle began. Marcus's retainer came to $10,000, essentially my entire emergency savings. Funds I had meticulously set aside over the years, skipping luxuries, declining impromptu getaways, and clipping digital coupons just to maintain a cushion. At our first formal meeting, he leaned forward, his tone level but firm. "Amber, let's be clear. Legally, your parents don't have a leg to stand on. They falsified documents, misused your private data, and placed you in financial jeopardy. Without consent. That's indefensible. That's encouraging, isn't it? I asked cautiously. Yes and no, he replied. The facts are on our side. The challenge is endurance. Their strategy is to exhaust you emotionally and financially. They're counting on you running out of strength before this ever reaches a verdict. Together, we prepared a detailed response refuting each accusation and simultaneously filed counterclaims for emotional torment, reputational harm, and coordinated defamation. We requested dismissal on the basis that the original complaint lacked any viable legal structure. But Marcus warned me up front, justice wouldn't arrive quickly. Judge Caroline Reeves was assigned to preside. A preliminary hearing on our motion to dismiss? Scheduled for 3 months down the road. In the meantime, nothing improved. The mortgage company's inquiry dragged on, with representatives reminding me that until a final decision was made, the loan would remain attached to my identity. My credit rating started to decline. I found myself unable to move forward with even basic financial planning. Heather had fully settled into the house. She uploaded polished photos to social media, showcasing the living room, backyard, even her newly furnished bedroom, complete with fairy lights and designer bedding. Her captions were saccharine, grateful for love that builds homes, or, when your people believe in your dreams. It was salt in an open wound. The monetary burden started crushing me. Legal fees snowballed. Days off for legal preparation. And court meetings affected my paycheck. I stopped contributing to retirement accounts. My credit cards, which I had kept pristine since grad school, began to carry balances again. I skipped the annual weekend retreat with my closest friends, telling them I was swamped at work. The truth was, groceries had gone on a credit card that week, and then there was the mental price. I lost nearly 10 pounds, not by choice, but because my appetite vanished. Stress-induced insomnia returned, and I began waking up in the middle of the night, heart hammering, air stuck somewhere between my lungs and throat. My hair, once my favorite feature, started falling out during showers and brushing. I kept finding strands on my pillow in the morning. Even those closest to me struggled to grasp the severity. "They're your family," friends would murmur, as if that absolved everything. Or worse, maybe just cover it for a while. What's a few years? You're doing well. That kind of logic made my skin crawl. As though betrayal should be tolerated when it's wrapped in familiarity. As though violating boundaries was somehow less damaging because it came from blood. Even my therapist started to suggest I compromise. Sometimes healing means letting go of the idea of fairness, she said during one session. Would maintaining ties be worth some sacrifice? I left her office and never returned. I didn't need anyone else urging me to absorb another hit in the name of familial peace. I wasn't interested in playing martyr to their dysfunction anymore. 3 months into the chaos, Marcus received a proposal from my parents' legal team. They wanted a deal. If I agreed to shoulder the mortgage payments for 5 years, they would eventually refinance the house in Heather's name. Once that transition occurred, the case would be dropped. In theory, the nightmare would end. Marcus laid the offer on his desk without commentary. "This decision is yours," he said simply. I stared at the paperwork, my mind a battlefield of thoughts. 5 years. 60 months of payments on a property I'd never lived in. Technically survivable, financially possible, though devastating. It would buy me quiet. An end to courtrooms, lawyers, late-night panic spirals, and yet, what would it really cost? Accepting would mean surrender. It would mean telling my parents that weaponizing my finances worked. That trickery, manipulation, and pressure were effective tools for getting what they wanted. That they could rewrite history, exploit my stability, and walk away with no consequences. It would be 5 more years of control. Of knowing I'd caved to protect peace instead of standing up for what was right. I looked Marcus in the eye. "No," I said, my voice steady for the first time in ages. "We go to court. Not for 5 years. Not 5 months. Not even 5 fleeting minutes. What they did wasn't a misunderstanding, it was calculated, deliberate, and unforgivable. Backing down would be like signing off on the pain they caused." Marcus studied my face, then gave a single nod. "I'll deliver our rejection. And Amber, for what it's worth, this is the right stand." That night, the one before the court hearing on our motion to dismiss, I collapsed emotionally. My apartment, once a safe haven, now looked like a battlefield. Legal folders, overdue notices, and half-eaten leftovers covered every surface. I sank to the floor, overwhelmed by the weight of it all, and sobbed harder than I ever had in my adult life. The kind of tears that come from years of holding everything in. I mourned the child who never felt quite enough. The teenager who studied late into the night while others partied. The woman who had poured herself into building a future her parents might finally respect. And here I was, reduced to defending myself in court against the very people I had once longed to make proud. But as my crying faded into silence, something shifted. There, in the quiet ruins of my resolve, a new clarity emerged. This wasn't just about legal papers or financial sabotage. This was about reclaiming my agency. About refusing to allow betrayal to define me. I texted Marcus just before midnight, "I'm ready. No matter how hard it gets." His reply came instantly, "Be at the courthouse by 8:30. And Amber, you're stronger than any of them." For the first time in weeks, I slept without interruption. The courthouse stood like a monument to seriousness, its stone facade cool, authoritative, intimidating. I arrived early, dressed sharply in my tailored navy suit and practical heels, every detail of my appearance polished to perfection. Marcus met me out front, briefcase swinging, his demeanor calm but alert. "Judge Reeves is fair and sharp," he said as we passed through security. "She won't be swayed by emotion. Facts matter here. Let me handle everything unless she speaks directly to you." We entered courtroom 4B, already filling with other litigants awaiting their cases. My gaze quickly found them, my parents and Heather. All three sat rigidly on the opposite bench, costumed in muted colors and subtle jewelry, their outfits curated for maximum, respectable optics. My mother clutched a floral handkerchief. My father sat stiffly, arms crossed, mouth set in the stern expression I'd known my entire life. Heather avoided my gaze until she thought I wasn't looking, then she gave me a smirk sharp enough to cut glass. Their lawyer, Lawrence Peterson, looked like he had walked out of a corporate photo shoot, perfectly groomed, graying temples, smug confidence radiating from every pore. He acknowledged Marcus with a terse nod, ignoring me entirely. At exactly 9 a.m., the bailiff announced the judge's entrance. Caroline Reeves walked in with composed authority. Late 50s, intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses, gray curls cropped close to her scalp. She gave each case before ours the attention of someone who didn't tolerate nonsense, moving efficiently through the docket. Finally, at 10:45, the bailiff called out, "Wilson and Wilson versus Wilson." My stomach twisted, but I rose beside Marcus and followed him to the defendant's table. Across from us, my parents and Peterson settled into their positions. The air in the room felt heavier. Judge Reeves spoke without looking up at first. "We are here for the defendant's motion to dismiss. I have reviewed the original filing, the response, and all related documentation." She looked up. "Attorney Bennett, proceed." Marcus stood, calm and deliberate, buttoning his jacket before beginning. "Your Honor, this lawsuit fails to meet the basic legal standard necessary to proceed. The plaintiffs seek to enforce an alleged verbal arrangement that their daughter, my client, would pay for a home purchased on behalf of her sibling. Not only is such an oral agreement unenforceable under real estate law, but it is contradicted by the facts." He moved methodically through each point. "There is no signed contract. No documented agreement. Furthermore, the plaintiffs have admitted to forging Miss Wilson's signature on mortgage documents, acts which constitute identity theft and fraud under both state and federal law." As he spoke, my father's jaw tightened. My mother's knuckles whitened around her tissue. Heather kept her expression frozen, but her foot tapped nervously beneath the table. Marcus concluded with calm precision. "In addition, we have submitted counterclaims for the damage to Miss Wilson's personal and financial life, harassment, loss of creditworthiness, and public defamation stemming from this deeply harmful situation." Judge Reeves scribbled notes during his remarks but offered no reaction. Once Marcus sat, she turned to Peterson, "Counsel for the plaintiffs, your rebuttal." Peterson rose with theatrical flair, smoothing his lapel. "Your Honor, while my colleague's summary may appear sound in a purely transactional context, this case arises from a familial agreement, one rooted in mutual trust and the kind of commitments that don't always come with dotted lines." He turned toward me as he spoke. Miss Wilson understood her role in supporting her sister. The arrangement, though informal, was made clear through years of conversation and familial expectation. The plaintiffs acted in good faith, believing they were doing what was best for the family unit. I nearly scoffed out loud. Good faith didn't involve forged signatures and veiled threats. Peterson continued with phrases like family bonds, moral duty, and honor-bound obligations. He invoked cultural values and generational tradition, painting me as the outlier, the cold, selfish daughter unwilling to help her struggling sibling. Judge Reeves didn't blink. She let him finish, then turned a page in her folder and looked up, expression unreadable. What she said next would determine whether I would continue fighting or finally be free. Underscore 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 The Wilsons supported their daughter's development, nurtured her ambitions, and, in return, expected her to assist her sibling when needed, Peterson proclaimed, voice dripping with calculated sincerity. I clenched my jaw to suppress the urge to laugh. The audacity. My parents hadn't contributed a cent toward my degree. Every scholarship, job, and sleepless night had been mine alone. This so-called understanding lived only in their heads. Marcus had cautioned me to remain expressionless, no matter what outrageous lies were told in court. It took everything I had to follow his advice. Peterson's performance continued, his tone intensifying. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson acted in what they believed was their daughter's best interest. They took the necessary steps to help Heather secure a home, trusting that Amber had consented and would uphold the family commitment. It wasn't until after the purchase was finalized that Ms. Wilson unexpectedly reneged on her responsibilities, leaving her parents with no alternative but legal action. Judge Reeves, ever composed, finally spoke. Counsel, are you asserting that parents possess a legal entitlement to sign a mortgage in their adult child's name based solely on assumed familial obligation? Peterson hesitated. Not precisely, Your Honor. What I'm saying is that, within this family's unique dynamic, there was implied permission. She leaned slightly forward. Let's clarify something. The plaintiff's own complaint acknowledges that Ms. Wilson's signature appeared on official mortgage paperwork, though she was not present. Are your clients challenging that fact? They are not, Your Honor, Peterson replied, suddenly less confident. However, they contend that they had implicit authority, based on previous arrangements, to act on her behalf. Judge Reeves's tone grew firmer. I'd like to hear directly from Mr. Wilson. My father rose and walked toward the witness stand. After being sworn in, he offered the same polished act he'd likely rehearsed in front of a mirror. Your Honor, we've always prided ourselves on being a tight-knit, supportive household. When Amber started excelling professionally, we were proud of her accomplishments. Naturally, we assumed that she would want to give back by helping her sister, who hasn't had the same opportunities. Mr. Wilson, Judge Reeves interjected, did you ever explicitly ask your daughter if she would accept legal responsibility for a mortgage valued at $480,000? Well, he stalled, we didn't phrase it quite that way. But we've had numerous discussions about Heather's housing needs and Amber's role in assisting. So, no, the judge stated. There was no direct question. No explicit approval. It was implied, he insisted, voice rising slightly. Judge Reeves's tone turned ice cold. Mr. Wilson, you are under oath. Did you, or did you not, submit mortgage documents containing your daughter's forged signature? My father squirmed. I wouldn't characterize it as forging. My wife filled out the forms on Amber's behalf because we genuinely believed she would be supportive. The judge's expression darkened. Let me make something perfectly clear. Submitting someone else's name on legally binding documents without their informed consent is forgery. Whether the person is your daughter or a complete stranger is irrelevant. Then it was my mother's turn. She took the stand with watery eyes and a trembling voice. Her testimony painted me as cold and detached, the ungrateful child who had turned her back on her family. She described their actions as desperate attempts to secure Heather's future, driven only by fear and love. Heather followed with her own carefully curated victim narrative. According to her, I had hoarded wealth and abandoned my duties as an older sibling. She described my refusal to fund her new home as cruel and vindictive, accusing me of wielding money like a weapon. Marcus remained attentive, objecting when their statements veered into speculation or distorted past events. Judge Reeves sustained most of his objections, keeping the hearing grounded in facts rather than emotion. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand with a calm exterior, though my heart pounded like a drum. I took my oath and sat, determined to present the truth clearly and without theatrics. I financed my own education, I began. My parents didn't assist. I worked multiple jobs, applied for scholarships, and graduated without debt. I've built a stable life through diligent saving and responsible choices. At no point did I agree, explicitly or implicitly, to take on a mortgage for my sister. Not once. Ms. Wilson, the judge asked, have there been previous instances where your parents handled financial matters using your information or in your name without prior approval? Yes, Your Honor, I answered, recounting several alarming examples. There were credit card applications I never authorized, loans I had no knowledge of, even tax documents filed without my review. I always confronted them, and each time I was told I was being too formal or selfish about money. That it was family, and families share everything. Judge Reeves nodded thoughtfully, then Peterson stepped forward for cross-examination. His tone shifted to calculated provocation. Miss Wilson, isn't it true that you've always prioritized your finances over your sister's well-being? Marcus objected immediately. Argumentative. Sustained, said the judge, Peterson. Tried again. Would providing assistance really have been such a hardship, given your financial standing? Another objection. Sustained again. Peterson's strategy was clear: paint me as heartless. But Marcus shut him down at every turn. Then Marcus introduced the most explosive piece of evidence, a thread of private messages between my parents uncovered during the discovery process. In one exchange, my father wrote, "Amber will never go along with this if we ask her. Better to act now and handle her reaction later. She's always been too independent for her own good." It was the smoking gun. Calculated deception, documented. In black and white. For a moment, the room was silent. Even Peterson looked rattled. Judge Reeves read the messages aloud, her face unreadable. When she looked up, the air in the courtroom felt heavier, and I knew the tide was turning. In another uncovered message, my mother had written, "Once everything is finalized and Heather settles in, what can Amber really do? She won't allow her sister to end up without a roof, no matter how much noise she makes." That single sentence exposed the cold calculation behind their choices. Any pretense of misunderstanding or blurred boundaries between familial obligation and legal consent dissolved completely. Their strategy had always relied on guilt, not agreement. As the hearing concluded, Judge Reeves adjusted her glasses and surveyed the courtroom. "I will take this matter under advisement and issue a ruling within 10 days, she announced evenly. "However, let me emphasize something for the record. Close family ties do not override fundamental legal standards. Consent, contractual clarity, and identity protection are not optional, regardless of who you're dealing with." With a firm nod, she declared, "Court is adjourned." While gathering our documents, I glanced across the room. My mother met my gaze for the briefest moment. Something flickered there, perhaps uncertainty, maybe a crack in her facade, but it vanished as swiftly as it appeared. Her expression snapped back to the familiar mask of self-righteousness, and she turned away. "You handled yourself with dignity," Marcus said as we exited the courthouse. The judge seemed receptive to our position. Those messages were devastating to their case. But be warned, legal triumphs rarely feel fulfilling when family is involved. Are you emotionally prepared for that? I exhaled slowly. I think I understand something now. This whole ordeal was never really about finances. It was about validation. They've never accepted me as an autonomous adult capable of independent decisions. This was about reclaiming my agency. And now? Marcus asked. Now, I replied, I need to respect myself enough to uphold that boundary, no matter the verdict. We parted ways on the stone steps, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange but comforting stillness. The uncertainty remained, but I had spoken my truth, to the court, to my parents, and to myself. No matter what happened next, that act alone felt like a quiet revolution. 9 days later, I was seated in a budget meeting at work when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Ruling is in. Call when you're free." My pulse quickened. I politely excused myself and stepped into the corridor. Marcus answered instantly. "Judge Reeves has dismissed the entire case with prejudice," he said without build-up. "She also approved our request for sanctions against your parents and their attorney due to the frivolous nature of the lawsuit." I leaned against the wall, knees suddenly unsteady. "What does that entail?" "It means several things," Marcus explained. "First, the case is permanently closed. They can't refile or repackage it under another name. Second, your parents are now required to cover a portion of your legal expenses as a consequence for misusing the legal process. Third, the judge included explicit language criticizing their conduct, which may influence both the mortgage company's internal review and any criminal assessment from the district attorney." Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. "How much of the legal bill will they have to pay?" "She awarded $15,000, Marcus replied. "It won't erase every cost you've borne, but it's a meaningful start. There's more," he added. The judge issued a temporary restraining order. "Your parents and sister are now legally prohibited from contacting you directly for the next 90 days. She cited ongoing harassment as justification. I hadn't requested that kind of protection, though Rachel had floated the idea months prior. Clearly, Judge Reeves had seen enough in the evidence to act proactively. Marcus wasn't done. Finally, the judge referred the matter to the local district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation regarding mortgage fraud. That doesn't guarantee charges, but the possibility now exists. That last revelation hit differently. While part of me felt vindicated that the justice system acknowledged the depth of the wrongdoing, another part recoiled at the prospect of criminal proceedings involving my own parents. The thought of them facing prosecution, even after everything, stirred complicated emotions I wasn't ready to unpack. "What about the house? And the mortgage?" I asked. "The court ordered that the mortgage lender receive a full report." Of the ruling, which should expedite the fraud resolution process, Marcus said. As for the property itself, it's no longer your problem. That's between your family and the bank. You are completely disassociated from it, legally and financially. After ending the call, I sat in the stairwell of the office building. For several minutes, overwhelmed by the whirlwind of emotions, exhaustion, vindication, sorrow, and muted rage. I had won. Unambiguously. And yet, the moment didn't feel victorious. It felt hollow. A reminder of how deeply betrayal cuts when it's delivered by people you once trusted implicitly. News of the verdict traveled quickly. That evening, the story was featured online in the Boston Globe under the headline, "Judge Rules Against Parents Who Forged Daughter's Signature to Secure Mortgage." The article was brief but thorough, referencing court documents and including a quote from Marcus about the importance of financial boundaries, even within families. I turned off my phone, unable to handle the inevitable influx of messages and calls. When I powered it back on the next morning, I found 47 missed calls, over 100 text messages, and dozens of social media alerts. Journalists requesting comments. Distant relatives offering support or voicing disapproval. A few old acquaintances who'd previously aligned with Heather now sent awkward messages attempting to reconnect, but the most gut-wrenching was a voicemail from Heather, timestamped 2:13 a.m. Her voice was slurred. "I hope you're happy now. Mom's had 2 panic attacks. Dad says he's filing for bankruptcy. And I have 30 days to pack up and leave because the bank's foreclosing. You ruined everything, Amber. I always knew you were selfish, but this? This is monstrous. I hope your precious money keeps you warm, because you don't have a family anymore." She hung up without saying goodbye, and just like that, I realized, she was right. I didn't have a family anymore, but maybe, just maybe, I had finally found my freedom. I erased Heather's voicemail after a single listen, refusing to let it occupy space in my thoughts. The fallout surrounding the property wasn't a result of anything I had done, it was the natural consequence of the choices made by those who tried to manipulate and deceive. How they rationalized their behavior, or whether they ever admitted fault, was entirely out of my hands. 3 days after the court's decision, an unexpected message arrived in my inbox. It was from Uncle Paul, my father's brother, who had drifted away from the family years prior. I never knew the full story behind his distance, but his words now painted a telling picture. "Amber, I've been keeping an eye on the situation with your parents. I want you to know how impressed I am with your strength. You're not alone. Similar tactics were used against me back in the 90s. It's a legacy that runs deep in this family. I'm sorry you had to bear it in isolation. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." His email was a revelation. This wasn't a standalone betrayal, nor was it merely about Heather. It was a generational pattern, a well-rehearsed act cloaked in the name of loyalty. Financial control paraded as care. Guilt masked as tradition. Knowing someone else had walked this path, and emerged stronger, gave me an unexpected sense of reassurance. A week later, I received official confirmation from the mortgage lender. Their fraud investigation had concluded, and my name was completely expunged from all documentation associated with the property. My credit profile would be amended accordingly, and the company was pursuing independent legal action against my parents. I was free, from liability, from entanglement, from the mess they created. The media attention faded quickly, just as Marcus predicted. The story had been compelling enough to earn local headlines, but not salacious enough to linger. In 2 short weeks, the articles vanished from front pages, replaced by newer scandals and clickbait controversies, but while the public forgot, the private aftershocks lingered. Relatives who had previously judged me began reaching out. Many cited the court's ruling and text evidence as the reason for their change of heart. Their support came wrapped in apologies that felt insufficient after months of silence or veiled judgment. I responded kindly, but with measured distance. Rebuilding damaged trust would be a marathon, not a sprint, if it even happened at all. Heather's online presence underwent a dramatic shift. Gone were the selfies in her dream home. In their place, cryptic quotes about betrayal, endurance, and toxic relationships. She never named me, but the subtext was obvious to anyone familiar with our recent past. Through mutual contacts, I learned she had moved back into my parents' basement. The Winchester house now sat vacant, an eerie monument to the consequences they tried so hard to avoid. Roughly 4 weeks after the ruling, I received another voicemail, this time from my mother. She had found a way around my call blocks using a new number. "Amber, this is all getting out of hand. We need to speak, face to face, and work through this as a family. Call me." I never returned her message. The most unforeseen development came 6 weeks after the verdict. A formal letter arrived from the district attorney's office. After reviewing Judge Reeves's referral, they had chosen not to pursue criminal prosecution against my parents. Their rationale included my expressed disinterest in pressing charges, and the existence of robust civil remedies already implemented. However, the document noted that the matter could be revisited should additional evidence surface or if I changed my position regarding legal consequences. That decision brought an overwhelming wave of release. While it had been necessary to protect myself through legal channels, I never desired to see my parents behind bars. The civil judgment had provided all the resolution I needed: legal separation from the fraudulent mortgage and formal validation that their behavior was wrong. With the legal drama finally behind me, I turned my focus toward rebuilding. The $15,000 sanction award covered a fraction of my expenses, but it softened the financial blow. I developed a revised budget, reopened my savings plan, and resumed contributions to my retirement fund, small but meaningful acts that helped me regain control. More significantly, I addressed the emotional wreckage. I found a new therapist, someone who specialized in financial abuse and estrangement. This time, I sought someone who understood the cost of toxic loyalty, who didn't push reconciliation as a universal solution. Their validation became the first step toward healing. I also reconnected with friends who had shown up during the storm, and slowly expanded my support system to include individuals who valued honesty, healthy limits, and respect. For the first time in years, my world felt like mine again. 6 months after Judge Reeves handed down her decision, I received a surprising delivery at my doorstep. The box was unmarked, but the handwriting on the return label was unmistakable: my grandmother Ruth. Inside, I found something I hadn't seen since childhood: a small handcrafted wooden jewelry box, carved by my late grandfather. It had always remained on my dresser at my parents' house, a symbol of simpler times. Alongside it was a short note, penned in delicate script: "This belongs with you. Love always, Grandma." I called her that evening, unable to hold back my emotion. For the first time, she opened up about her own history with my mother. "Your mom? She's always had a way of dividing people," she said gently. "She did it with her own siblings, too. I should have spoken up more when you were little, but, well, hindsight is clear in ways the present rarely is." Her words didn't excuse the past, but they brought closure. I wasn't broken. I wasn't selfish. I had simply refused to play a rigged game any longer, and that decision, finally, felt like peace. That evening conversation with Grandma Ruth marked the beginning of something unexpected, a relationship rooted not in appearances or forced pleasantries but in sincerity and mutual understanding. We started speaking regularly, often exchanging letters that felt more honest than any conversations I'd ever had with my own parents. In those handwritten notes, we built a new kind of connection, quiet, respectful, and real. As 6 months passed since the court's final verdict, a realization emerged. Despite the emotional toll and financial strain of everything I had endured, I felt freer than I had in years. Gone was the ever-present tension of bracing for another manipulative phone call or obligation masked as tradition. The exhaustion that came from endlessly chasing validation had finally faded. For the first time since adulthood, I felt truly autonomous. Not only with my bank account or housing, but with my identity, my emotions, my voice. There was no more pressure to play a role in a story someone else had written for me. By then, the spotlight from local news outlets had completely faded. Still, every so often, someone from a legal forum or personal network would reach out. One woman messaged me privately: "Your story helped me say no to my parents for the first time. I didn't realize how bad it was until I saw what happened to you. Thank you." Those words reminded me that everything I'd endured had meaning far beyond the courtroom. I hadn't just defended a deed or a bank account, I had challenged an inherited script that said you must sacrifice everything for family, even your peace of mind. A belief that allows control, guilt, and exploitation to parade as love. I never heard directly from my parents again. But word filtered through distant relatives and social contacts. They had, indeed, declared bankruptcy. The family home had been sold, and they had relocated to a modest rental in a nearby suburb. Heather had found a clerical position, working as an administrative coordinator. Depending on who told the tale, she was either starting fresh or still playing the victim. Either way, I wished them stability, but from afar. I harbored no fantasies about reconciliation. Some ties, once scorched, are better left severed. Some forms of absence are more nourishing than presence ever was. One crisp autumn morning, nearly 8 months after the court ruling, I met up with Jessica for coffee. She had been a lifeline during the early legal chaos, offering calm guidance and a grounding perspective when I was spiraling. That day, she posed a question that stopped me mid-sip. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked gently. "Taking a stand, I mean, considering everything you gave up." I watched the steam rise from my cup, feeling the weight of her question settle into my chest. "No," I answered after a moment of thought. "It cost a lot: money, relationships, and certainty. But it gave me something more powerful than comfort, the ability to protect myself. To know, beyond any doubt, that my limits are valid. That I don't have to destroy myself to keep others satisfied. Jessica nodded slowly. That's worth more than any house in Winchester. A smile tugged at my lips. Exactly. That's the foundation I'm building the rest of my life on. 1 year after the lawsuit was thrown out, I found myself sitting in a quiet cafe across from a young woman named Rachel. She reminded me of who I had been 18 months earlier, tired, overwhelmed, and desperate for clarity. In her lap sat a folder packed with bank records and letters. Her eyes brimmed with unshed tears. My parents took out a car loan under my name, she whispered. They say I owe them for raising me. But I'm drowning in student debt, and rent's already killing me. We had connected through an online community for survivors of family-related financial abuse. I had joined 6 months earlier while healing and had gradually become a group moderator. This was our first time meeting. In person, you're not the only one, I assured her. And what they've done isn't loving, it's manipulative. Just because their family doesn't make it right. As I helped her map out next steps, fraud reports, credit protections, possible legal aid, I felt something stir inside me. It wasn't pity. It wasn't anger. It was empowerment. A quiet pride that I could use my pain to guide someone else toward safety. Looking at her, I saw my past self, trapped in a web of misplaced loyalty, terrified of setting boundaries, and ashamed for wanting autonomy. In the months following the trial, grief had struck like a storm I never expected. Not just for what I had lost, but for the illusion I had clung to for so long. I hadn't simply lost a family, I had finally admitted to myself that I never really had the one I thought existed. The version I defended so fiercely had only ever existed in my imagination. The emotional aftermath had been relentless. One moment, I was numb, mechanically pushing through workdays and brushing off concern. The next, I was overwhelmed, crippled by sorrow sparked by something as minor as a photo on a colleague's desk or a family ad on the radio. My therapist, Dr. Lena Martinez, had helped me survive those months. You're not just mourning your family, she once told me. You're grieving the idea of who they should have been. During one particularly intense session, Dr. Martinez offered a perspective that permanently shifted the way I viewed my pain. You're grieving the idea of what those bonds might have been, she said gently. You're mourning the childhood you should have had, not the one you experienced. Her words didn't just resonate, they cracked something open. Suddenly, it made sense why my sorrow felt so disproportionate. I hadn't only lost my family. I had been forced to acknowledge that what I had lost may have never existed in the first place. The idealized version of family I clung to was fiction, crafted to soothe the discomfort of decades spent living under manipulation and imbalance. Therapy helped me untangle the suffocating mesh of guilt, perceived duty, and inherited dysfunction that had long defined my interactions with those closest to me. I came to understand that I'd been subtly trained, from early childhood, to ignore my own well-being and treat my sister's needs as paramount. Any attempt to protect myself had been branded disloyalty. Limits were considered aggression, not autonomy. The pressure to conform to this unspoken rulebook had been constant and crushing. Financial abuse, Dr. Martinez noted one day, is especially devastating because it masquerades as care. Money touches every part of your life, your shelter, your future, your identity. When someone uses finances to control you, they're dismantling your sense of security piece by piece. That insight gave me a new lens to interpret what I had endured. This wasn't about petty grievances or household budgets, it was about reclaiming ownership of my life after years of being undermined by those I trusted most. As I engaged in this emotional excavation, my practical life began to shift too. Half a year after the trial ended, I was offered a promotion at work. I moved from senior financial analyst to team lead, accompanied by a generous salary bump. The irony was almost poetic. My professional knowledge of finance had empowered me to recognize, confront, and ultimately escape the manipulation occurring in my personal sphere. Soon after, I moved into a sun-drenched 2-bedroom condo. Purchasing it with my own carefully managed mortgage felt like rewriting history. This home wasn't tied to coercion or guilt. It symbolized strength. One bedroom became my sanctuary, the other a blend of workspace and guest room, space for restoration and possibility. My personal life reflected a similar evolution. While some friendships dissolved, those unable or unwilling to engage with the complexity of family estrangement, others blossomed. Jessica, the paralegal who had initially referred me to Marcus, had become a trusted confidant. Mark, a colleague who had silently covered for me during court hearings without demanding explanations, grew into someone I could genuinely rely on. Perhaps most surprisingly, I formed a lasting connection with Uncle Paul, my father's long-estranged brother. What began as a single email offering encouragement grew into regular calls and eventual visits. Through his candid stories, I gained context I had never known. He described long-standing dynamics I hadn't understood as a child, patterns of silence, favoritism, and coercion that had woven their way through our lineage like poison vines. Your grandfather pulled the same tricks on your dad, Uncle Paul said once, voice heavy with memory. The difference? Your father gave in. You didn't. That's the difference between surviving and surrendering. His words redefined everything. I hadn't just broken contact, I had broken a generational cycle. Framing my actions not as rebellion, but as resistance to inherited dysfunction, offered profound clarity. I hadn't destroyed a family. I had refused to uphold a broken legacy. Another unexpected wellspring of healing came through connection with others who had walked similar paths. The online support group where I first encountered Rachel became a cornerstone of my recovery. Initially, it was just a forum, a digital space to exchange resources, vent frustrations, and share legal tips. But over time, it transformed into something deeper, a chosen family of survivors offering the kind of compassion I had never received from my biological relatives. Within that space, my story became more than catharsis. It became a tool. I began contributing more frequently, first anonymously, then under my real name. I started a modest blog focused on navigating financial betrayal within families. Before long, I was invited to share my experience at local events centered around economic empowerment and fraud prevention. Each time I spoke aloud the truth of what had happened, it lost some of its sting. Slowly, the pain transformed from something that haunted me into something that might protect others. One message from a fellow group member still lingers in my mind. Because of you, she wrote, I pulled my credit report. I found 3 cards I didn't know existed. If I hadn't heard your story, I never would have checked. Messages like that reminded me that even the most painful chapters of our lives can carry purpose. The limits I had once viewed as barriers had become protective walls, not just for myself, but for others navigating similar betrayals. Nearing the first anniversary of the court decision, I received an email from Heather that was unlike anything she had sent before. Gone was the entitlement, the accusatory tone. In its place was something quieter, uncertain, even vulnerable. I've been reflecting a lot, she wrote. I can't say I fully grasp everything that happened, or that I agree with how you handled it. But I've started noticing behaviors from Mom and Dad that remind me of what you tried to warn us about. I've started therapy. I don't expect you to reply, but I felt you should know. I sat with that message for days, wrestling with how, or whether, to respond. With Dr. Martinez's guidance, I eventually wrote back. My reply was brief but sincere, acknowledging her effort and wishing her well in her healing process. I didn't invite further contact. True repair, if possible at all, would take time, genuine transformation, and a deep reimagining of our dynamic, not just a few exchanged messages or shared sentiment. From my parents, I heard nothing directly. Occasionally, extended relatives would pass along updates. I learned they had moved into a smaller condo and that my father's retirement plans had been postponed indefinitely. I didn't gloat at their hardship. I simply recognized it as the natural outgrowth of choices they had made themselves. There was a time when I would have stepped in to cushion the impact. That time had passed. My own financial footing had taken time to rebuild. Legal expenses had drained most of my reserves, but with my increased salary and a clearer picture of my priorities, I began to recover. Within 10 months, my emergency fund was restored. With the help of a financial planner, I implemented additional safeguards, credit freezes, fraud monitoring, and a comprehensive estate plan that would prevent anyone from ever misusing my name again. You've turned a devastating situation into a foundation of strength, my advisor said during our annual review. Most people don't come out of something like that wiser. You did. I left the meeting lighter, not just in terms of bank balances, but emotionally too. Meeting Rachel in that Cambridge cafe brought my journey full circle. As she clutched her folder and shared her fears, I recognized the exact cocktail of panic, disbelief, and guilt that had once gripped me. Watching her straighten in her chair as we discussed credit reports and legal resources reminded me of my own transformation. What if they never forgive me? She asked hesitantly. I took a breath before responding. That's a painful possibility, I admitted. But eventually I realized that wasn't the right question. The real question is, can you forgive yourself if you don't protect your future? She nodded slowly, something shifting behind her eyes. I think I need to take action, she whispered, collecting her things with newfound purpose. I handed her my card as we stood. Whatever path you choose, you won't face it alone. The group is there, and so am I. On the walk home, the last 18 months unspooled behind me. The family I'd once moved mountains to please was no longer part of my life. Their absence still tugged at me during quiet moments. But in that empty space, something stronger had taken root. I had developed trust in my own instincts. I had formed friendships grounded in respect, not convenience. I had replaced inherited chaos with clarity, the very lawsuit meant to silence. And shame me had become the very thing that liberated me. My parents' attempt to control me through litigation had inadvertently given me the push I needed to construct something far more valuable than a home, a life designed on my own terms. As I approached my building, my phone vibrated. A message from one of the support group moderators appeared. Another member had joined, someone with a story eerily similar to mine and Rachel's. I stopped on the stoop, composing a thoughtful welcome message. Cycles like these, where financial coercion is disguised as love, don't vanish overnight. But every person who decides enough is enough chips away at their power. That is the real legacy I hope to leave. Not wealth. Not property. But the living example that boundaries are not barriers, they are bridges to healthier futures. Have you ever been forced to draw difficult lines with people you love over money or safety? I'd like to hear your story in the comments. If this journey resonated with you, please tap the like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about breaking free from toxic family dynamics, and above all, remember, prioritizing your peace is not betrayal. It's survival. Thank you for walking this road with me. I hope my story gives you the strength to walk your own, head high, heart protected, and future intact.